Gary, good evening.
Good evening.
And we've got an old friend of the show back. Richard
Richard.
Yes, I've come back in Crowdstrike week for those who celebrate.
Yeah, and that is the exact reason why I thought we should get you on the show tonight, because I know something you've been following very closely was the Crowdstrike incident last week, and that's why we're recording slightly early this week. So I've released the show slightly early this week because I wanted to catch up on this, because there's, in the last few months there's not been a huge amount of Microsoft news, and suddenly Microsoft are front page of the newspapers, new headlines, and I think perhaps a little bit unfavorably.
I would say unfairly so, actually, because there was an Azure funny that happened on Friday morning, and it was only it was one of those things that the authentication went a bit funny. But as that was happening, suddenly this thing called Crowdstrike began to appear on the forums, that people began saying, "Oh, there's getting blue screens of death and stuff." And yes, by coincidence, Crowdstrike, which I think they're the second biggest Windows anti-malware vendor after Microsoft, they're pretty huge, or they were pretty huge. I don't know how big they are now, or how big they'll be in 6 months' time. But they pushed out a new virus definition file, which was picked up by their software that runs on many corporate machines. It's a Crowdstrike is very much like a checkbox thing that corporates would do to say, yeah, we're protected, we're compliant, we've got Crowdstrike installed, we're compliant.
They'll be able to get sacked for buying Crowdstrike up until last week.
Exactly, and so they trust Crowdstrike. They trust Crowdstrike, and what happened was being anti-malware software, Crowdstrike actually runs in quite a curious way under Windows. It runs as, I think, basically a driver, effectively, and so it gets to run at a very low level in the operating system kernel. Now, of course, you can't wait for new drivers to be validated by Microsoft the same way you might do with, say, video drivers. Every time you want to update your malware definitions, you want to have a patch file come down, and so that's kind of how it worked. And it had this patch file come down, the new virus definitions, which was suddenly up, which were then installed in the background, and then because there was a fault with this particular file, what happened was any Windows machine, I think it was Windows 10, Windows 11, recent Windows servers, were then subject to the blue screen of death, which then appeared everywhere. And of course, people began to call it the Microsoft outage or the Windows outage. And of course, it wasn't actually Microsoft at all. Although one could argue that the architecture of Windows allows this anti-malware stuff to have to run at this level is maybe open to question. Looking back on it, was that such a wise move to basically have these things?
But they didn't have a choice. I mean, certainly in the EU, they didn't have a choice, because basically this is partly because of the EU mandate. And I know Microsoft actually even came out and said this today, that if the EU didn't mandate that they could not lock down the kernel for this type of purpose and allow alternative anti-malware, they would lock down the kernel and not allow it. If you look,
but here's the question. I mean, they didn't lock down the kernel because, I mean, the EU, again, we're talking here about the 2009, 15 years old, this mandate that said, and effectively said that Microsoft must give third-party security software the same level of access as its own software's got. Yeah. Now, I mean, they could, I think, have produced a kernel API that would have said, okay, you go through this API, we'll all use it. None of us will run at this level. I mean, they could have done that. They didn't do that. They said, okay, fine. The EU said you must all have the same access. Therefore, you've got the same access as us. But look, woulda, shoulda, coulda. You think, well, actually, maybe they could have done it this way.
I think there are definitely challenges in actually having the kernel API. I mean, actually, if you look at the alternatives, though, is Apple locked down the kernel. They never got any flack for doing that. So it is a challenge. I think. I mean, there's a whole lot of questions to be answered here. I mean, there's been some. I saw someone post somewhere, shoot the dev in terms of whoever released this code, but it's not one person.
It's not one person to press that red button, no. And again, I just want to emphasise. I mean, we're exchanging a discussion now about Microsoft. This wasn't Microsoft's fault. I want to just make that absolutely clear. They're not to blame it. But also, it's not a single dev. It's probably whatever process was happening in Crowdstrike.
Yeah.
Now, we need to also talk about the recovery procedure, because that's just nightmarish, isn't it?
I can tell you about that.
We can't hold it in if you don't experience about that. But I mean, unless you've got some pretty good remote operations there, or it's a laptop server room, you're fairly well scuppered, because you have to get into the Windows safe mode. So you've got to boot into safe mode, as I understand it, remove a file, and then on some workarounds I've seen tweak a registry key. I mean, if you're online, particularly if you look at Crowdstrike's own site, there's lots of ways of getting around it. The big problem is you need a BitLocker key if you've got a BitLocker encrypted drive, because quite correctly, you don't want anyone getting into your storage and looking at the data. That means use BitLocker. That means it's encrypted. But of course, if you boot into safe mode, you need that recovery key to get into your BitLocker drive.
All 64 digits of it.
And that means a human being has got to actually key it in. It's just, everything about this is for
horrendous.
For an IT administrator, this is like a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I also think it's really important to make very clear that if you're looking for support and help with this, look at Microsoft, look at Crowdstrike. Be very careful about bad actors now, because I've seen a few phishing attempts by people saying, "Oh, we'll fix your machine if you pay us this much money. We'll give you the patch to fix it," and then you're in a world of pain. So I think Crowdstrike and Microsoft have been very clear on ways around it, but it's a mess, isn't it?
I mean, we had the situation we've had. We were quite lucky, I think, with the time zones here in the UK. Colleagues in Europe were slightly worse affected because they were an hour ahead. So I got the first call about 7 a.m. on Friday morning from one of the directors, who just said, my Surface is blue screened. It doesn't normally do that. And so I said, well, give me an hour or so. I'll be in the office and I'll take a look at it. And then I started to see the tickets coming through. And it appeared the early starters all got the issues. If somebody started their machine up at 8:30, or they were fine. So we were quite lucky. We had maybe 5-10% of the of machines off. I'm running a small team, all remote. Well, in the office where I'm physically based, there's only about 3 machines off, and the rest were scattered around the country. So I had to talk through, and our team had to talk through all these people in warehouses across the UK. Right, you want to press F4 and you want to go right now. What's it say now? Okay, right, and then it, like you said, BitLocker key. So I have to get the BitLocker key, right? And then you have to give them the numbers, and then you have to go into C, and this is stuff that people aren't used to anymore.
No.
And so but a small team we just had to pick them off one by one and manually do that recovery. And we still had a couple today of people that their machines must have been on Friday, blue screened, but they weren't in on Friday. So when they came in today, they're on the blue screen. All the servers that were live ran Crowdstrike had that issue, but that through lights out it wasn't too bad. But yeah, speaking to some colleagues in European countries, the hour ahead actually caused them a lot more issues, and they had a lot more machines off. I think that's probably why Australia had it worse. When
Australia had it really bad, as did any company that had machines left on had just had it really bad. But yeah, so I don't want to say really. Apart from
Gary's just posted I'll include a link to show the recovery tool that Microsoft released.
Yeah,
but actually, for me, that's pointless, because by the time you talk somebody through changing the BIOS to boot off a USB drive to go and do the whole procedure and enter the app, BitLocker keys, everything else, the actual deleting the file is 2 minutes of a job. It's all the bits to get to the command prompt.
I mean, the one thing about that recovery tool they have released is in some cases it allows you to not have to enter the BitLocker key. So it is an advantage in that respect. And kudos to Microsoft for actually releasing this, because it's not, as we say, it's not their issue. It's Crowdstrike's issue. Crowdstrike should have been sorting all this out. And I know there likely to be some legal implications to Crowdstrike in the States at the very least.
I question that, can be. And there've been some. I mean, truly heartbreaking stories that I've heard from admins and things who've thought, okay, we need to, we're a bit locked up and we need the keys. The keys from the server. Oh no.
Yeah.
So it's okay. I put the keys on an encrypted server share with. Oh no, we can't get to it because it's
all the things you were advised to do.
Exactly. That's and that I think is actually one of these things. Again, Gary, perhaps you have some insights here. One of the ways that I've heard many people ran Crowdstrike quite correctly, and the correct advice is to run it on like N1 or N2. So you'll be 1 or 2 updates behind all the time. So they assumed they'd be fine because they thought, well, we're a few updates behind. Of course, they weren't, because that referred to the agent. It didn't refer to the definition.
Yeah, that's right, exactly that, and that's what's caught a lot of people out. And I think this is actually there's a trend with antivirus software to keep the definitions up to date, because obviously that's the bit you want to stop getting through. And sometimes you have to update the engine to stop those things as well. But the definitions are the key thing, and it's not seen as risky. Definitions don't break anything normally, and in this case, obviously, it did. And it's interesting. I think that actually may have been a flaw in why there was a flaw in the testing as well, because definitions don't break things, and people were probably a little blinkered on that. And and I go back to my thing about it's not the dev. I mean, devs would have nothing to do with this. This was a release of signatures, which is usually maintained by a completely separate team in an antivirus code, and it should have gone through all the regression testing and before it actually got deployed. And somehow that messed up and didn't go through and didn't pick up on the problem of the file. It's a classic breakdown. These things do happen, but on this scale, it's just, and it does it just makes you realise the vulnerability of systems out there. And interestingly enough, this is not the first time it's happened for Crowdstrike. I don't know if you saw that they had some problems with Linux a few months back as well.
They had some problems with Linux, and no one noticed.
Yes, yeah.
and isn't it? I don't know. I read somewhere that the CEO of Crowdstrike was the CTO of McAfee when they did the same thing. Was that incorrect?
I don't know if that's correct. I've heard that rumor, but I'm not sure that's.
I'm not quite sure if that's correct. But yes, certainly Crowdstrike have had problems with the Linux stuff. So
however you look at that's a warning you should have probably taken some notice of if you've had an issue with issue definition.
And I wonder whether this. Do you think the fallout of this will change the cyber security industry? As in, will companies perhaps not go for the blanket approach like many do, said you must install Crowdstrike on every endpoint, and perhaps we might see some saying, well, perhaps we want this region to use Crowdstrike and this region to use Microsoft, to edge your bets.
Or even within region, you actually hedge your bets by having multiple suppliers. It's difficult to maintain, difficult to manage that sort of stuff. What was interesting, I was talking to a few clients last week, and one of my clients hasn't actually got Crowdstrike installed on their kit through themselves, but they found that certain users had installed Crowdstrike and were having issues with it because it was such a thing. They'd been told in their previous business employment that it was the thing to have, so they'd used it. As I said, up until last weekend, nobody ever got fired for buying Crowdstrike.
Yeah. I mean, my concern would be that people might sort of use this as a reason to not do any kind of malware stuff or to step away from. Whereas, I mean, Crowdstrike, this is a bad failure. This is a very bad failure, but you do need anti-malware software.
And Crowdstrike has rightly been seen as the gold standard in that. It is one of the best ones out there in that respect, and certainly better than some of the alternatives, which may have their own flaws. But it is that challenge of the fact that it's a huge risk there, and it's a risk which is not easy to mitigate. And maybe that's actually the thing which needs to be taken into account now. Maybe there is something. There might be some onus on Microsoft here with the kernel stuff to actually say, okay, we need an easy way to roll back a failing driver. If we get something detected by blue screen, let's get rid of it, take it out, and then allow a reboot. And maybe that's an approach which potentially could be there. Whether they'll have the incentive to clear up Crowdstrike's mess is another matter, and obviously there's a financial cost in doing something like that. So. we shall see. But yeah, it's definitely it was a bad time for our industry, wasn't it? It really was a bad time.
There was lots of funny. One of the funny pictures I saw was because it was the Hungarian Grand Prix at the weekend.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you saw the F1 team.
Yeah, and Mercedes sponsored by Crowdstrike. And there was a nice funny picture from Friday morning's free practice with the Mercedes engineers sat at their desk of banks of monitor on the pit lane, and they all had the blue screen on them with the sad face on them. And of course, the guy from Mercedes has got the Crowdstrike logo on the back of his shirt as well. So it made for an excellent picture. Some photographer picked that up quite well. But the other teams that aren't sponsored by Crowdstrike were quite quick to say, we're not being affected. You know, McLaren, who I think their partner is Dell and Darktrace, isn't it? So we're not affected by it. But Mercedes obviously clearly were. But even the onboard camera system was affected by it. And
I mean, wasn't there? I can't remember the airline's name. There was some airline that said, well, we're not affected because we're still running, on our desks and things, Windows 3.1 and Windows 95.
Yes, I saw that, yeah.
That's not the message to take away from this. It's not the message to take away from this. Do not run those operating systems. They're bad.
Yeah.
But the ones running the old AS400, i-series green screens, but they didn't have the problem either.
And most of the back-end services were fine. It was just the lovely rich client-facing interfaces that went boom.
But then, of course, it was Hyper-V servers. That's what I had a bit of issue with. If your Hyper-V server, host server goes down, then you could have Linux running on it or whatever. But all those servers are off until you fire it. You fix it. It's a quick fix. It was 2 minutes on, lights out. But yeah, and then you've got to go through all the clients. So if you've got a Hyper-V server with 10 Hyper-V clients on there, that's 11 times you've got to go and fix it. So. It's a lot of work, and I quite like sometimes these stories though, because I think sometimes I get a bit of gentle ribbing from the directors in meetings, in board meetings and things. All these resources that IT takes, and all you do is you sit around and you tell us what we have. So on Friday I was like, well, yeah, now you know what we're here for for these kind of things.
Which I'll say, yeah, but this is your fault.
Yeah. But it does show you the interconnected nature of everything, doesn't it? That payments businesses couldn't take cash, couldn't take card payments, and everything else. And this is probably someone meant to sort of said that was kind of the Y2K thing that people were kind of expecting back in 2000 that never did happen, but it was that kind of scenario.
I mean, the payments thing is interesting because there were a few stores and chains around where I live where they've gone cash, they've gone card only recently, and then on Friday they were suddenly, we only take cash now.
Yeah,
it's got any cash anymore. It's a very, very strange place to be.
What I found hugely amusing was the fact that the airlines in America started taking card payments using the old paper swipe machines.
Those, yeah,
with embossing on them, which they then found that they couldn't do for several cards because they stopped embossing them.
Yeah.
I mean, they started doing that over here now where they don't emboss them either because it's cheaper not to emboss them. And a lot of American cards stopped embossing a few years back. So they couldn't do that. And they're getting people. And it was particularly the affluent members of society's cards, which don't have an embossing on because it was a style statement not to have the embossing on there. They couldn't then pay for that. So that was getting a bit interesting.
I do wonder whether Microsoft will look at the certainly on the client side that. It's the same now, client server, same thing with the kernel side. It's having that thing, like Gary said, of when it detects that blue screen's obviously detected something, and is there enough information for it to detect what caused that issue and disable it? But then, if it detects it's Crowdstrike and do you really want it to roll back and disable your antivirus solution?
Well,
no, it's so complex.
You don't need to necessarily get rid of Crowdstrike, but what you could do is roll if there's been an update, which you should know about because it's done through the Windows update mechanism. Roll that back.
And actually, interestingly, in I think one of the most recent builds, they've introduced they're in the process of introducing the sort of more granular sort of what's what I'm looking for on updates, where if needs be they can roll it back a small portion rather than going back all the way back to the last major update, which I think will be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a change because they used to do that, and then they changed it, didn't they? And now going back to that way I've seen to remember. So it used to be where there was incremental patches, a big one, incremental. But now the last few years, I think it's been everything's included, and now they're splitting that back out.
Right, yes. Whereas now they're going back. So I mean, I think yes, that must mean there must be some way they know the last known good state of the machine, and that's what you'd roll back to, the last known good state. So what was the last?
NT4 had that, didn't it? It was used to say, didn't it? Last known good. It never worked. I don't think it ever had it to that last known good thing ever work in NT4. But anyway, I know what you mean.
Yeah, NT4.
Yeah. So like you said, so they should know what was delivered down and the. But it's not a work of a moment, is it, to change the kernel and all that?
No. I mean, I would think it's I would think there's discussions happening now with Microsoft. I mean, I don't know, Gary, what your thoughts are. I would think the timescale would be measured in years if they want to actually implement changes at the kernel level.
The kernel levels, and it's not just the change. I mean, actually, the development of it's probably not that long, but the testing would be horrendous.
Regression testing would be epic for this. I mean, epic. But I mean, I think they're going to have to do something, or find some I mean, look at how this definition file that came from Crowdstrike managed to cause this level of end, because as Gary said, it's a definition file. This shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't happen. So what is it doing behind the scenes? I know. Let's make everything open source. Yay!
Yeah, my best guess on why it failed is it's probably a malformed file. But that's if it's a malformed file, that should have been picked up immediately on any regression testing and their testing, because basically if you've got a malformed file, it can't be read by the driver. By the driver, the driver crashes, and that's why then it falls over. But that's obvious, and I really struggle to see how that got through any testing. So
exactly. I mean, exactly, because even having not done any coding for about 15, 20 years, being able to stop your app crashing when it's presented with a garbage file is quite basic, if I'm honest. So why that should crash it and not be picked up, but I'm not blaming any particular dev here at all. This is clearly a process failure at CrowdStrike. But whether that process failed, I've no idea.
Yeah.
And then what do you think sort of the long-term implications will be for CrowdStrike themselves on this?
Yeah, well, it's definitely had an impact on the share value. That's it.
I mean, it has, although compared to where they were this time last year, I think they're still ahead.
Yeah, they're still up. They're still up, aren't they? Yeah.
So I mean,
still going to get its bonus.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see some kind of rebranding, maybe, or maybe even an acquisition, just because the CrowdStrike brand is probably a little bit toxic now. But maybe it's going to recover. Maybe will it? I mean, this was such a major event. I don't think people, especially IT, people are going to forget about it for a long time. So. I mean, and
especially with their name. I mean, the name is always it sums up what happened. People are going to remember it.
Yeah, I know. It's an app that's gone on from kind of it's been the second most popular Windows anti-malware tool after only Microsoft, I think. But it was kind of almost under the radar for many people. Most normal people would never have heard of it, and now everyone's heard of it. I
wonder whether it will force the big companies, Fortune 500, the big companies to then evaluate: do we continue and or do we look for something else? And maybe, like you said, they'll rebrand the Falcon engine, because it's the Falcon engine, wasn't it? Maybe there'll be a new engine, just a rebrand. But they certainly spend a hell of a lot of money on marketing, CrowdStrike. As I mentioned, Mercedes, but Le Mans cars were branded on it. The Spa 24 hours. I think I only watch motorsport, so I only know that. But they sponsor races, teams, cars, it's all over the place. So they seem to have a good budget for the marketing. Maybe on Friday I was saying, well, they should spend more on the testing and less on the while I was doing the next blue screen. But yeah, maybe I've calmed down a bit now.
It'd be interesting to attend this year's Falcon, which is that they named for their convention they have.
Yeah.
So that's coming up very shortly. I think that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. And it's interesting some of the misreporting that went around as well. I mean, I looked at the, I don't know, I was in a shop yesterday and I never read newspapers, but I did go and look at the front page of the Sunday papers, and they were all, Crowdstrike wasn't mentioned on the, I think it was the Mail or the Sun, and maybe, the tabloid ones. They didn't even mention Crowdstrike, it was just Microsoft. And I think that was wrong, really, because it's,
very wrong. But very understandable, because what people see is the Microsoft stuff.
That's what you see, isn't it? Windows has crashed. It's like, well, Windows has crashed, but what's crashed Windows is what. Yeah, but yes, I mean, I completely understand why a lot of the mainstream media called it the Microsoft outage, because to be fair, that's what most people would think. It's kind of it's Microsoft product appears to have crashed.
Yeah,
and they missed the Linux outage a few months back.
and because
no one cared.
Yeah. And I think it's what you said earlier as well, because they're corporate software, it wasn't crashing home users' laptops. So it was affecting, but it did, it crashed your car payments and you couldn't check in at the airport. That made the difference, doesn't it? So I just wonder whether there's something for Microsoft here to really promote Windows Defender, and I don't ever really get the feeling that they promote that actively because they don't want to get on in the antitrust territory with CrowdStrike and others, and that they do. Windows Defender is pushed for the client, for a consumer. You buy your new Surface or you buy your Surface Go, and it's got it's got Windows Defender on it and it works perfectly fine. But in a corporate environment, you need management software and all this kind of thing. But I kind of think that just make Windows Defender really good and just work. And do you really need all these expensive third-party solutions?
Well, yes, I mean, yes. You're quite right. There is the antitrust argument to be made if Microsoft puts these companies out of business. I mean, personally, I think Defender's fine for most purposes anyway. Although, again, it's very hard when you're going up when you're going up against someone like CrowdStrike, and you're just doing a compliance checklist to say, what have you got? CrowdStrike, check, done. Defender, how's it configured? And then down you go. But I had some person who sent me a joke saying, you don't, because everyone's been very quiet. I don't know if you noticed, but CrowdStrike are having this awful issue. The other antivirus vendors don't seem to be saying very much. I think there's a lot of there, but for the grace of God going on right now.
Yes, I can well imagine. Yeah, you don't want to become
And someone said, you don't think Microsoft's about to reveal that Defender is actually an OEM version of CrowdStrike, do you? No.
Yes. It's certainly it was certainly a challenge, and I do feel for in my industry, I think we had it where I work relatively easy. We had it under control fairly early on. Some countries, like I said, had worse than others, and some places were terrible. We had it really bad. But I did feel for people trying to check in at the airport, because you know what that's like when you want to go on holiday or come home. Even worse, trying to go home and all the systems are down. And I did see some people posting pictures like at the checking desk, and there's a blue screen and say, I can fix this for you. Do you want me to come round and fix it for you? But it's
just give it a bit like your checking desk offer.
Yeah, that wouldn't go down well.
That would, it's very funny. Although I think British Airways had a status page where they called it the Microsoft outage. I thought, you cheeky so-and-sos.
Yeah. So it certainly was an interesting week. I think an interesting day. It's repercussions are gonna rattle on for some time, I think.
I think we got a few more days of. I mean, it's we had the worst. We're now. I think most IT items are now in mob up mode, which means they've probably got a few more days worth of just tidying up things. But I think we should be okay for most IT purposes. We will be okay by the end of this week, which is handy because I think isn't sysadmin appreciation day coming up fairly soon, 26th.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I think I should be sharing that one around. Yeah, I'll definitely be sharing that one around. It's machines. I'll tell you what it'll be. It's little things like, like door entry systems. They often don't have a server as such. They have a PC that has a little bit of software that runs, and then, so the door entry is working fine. But that's the PC that you use to admin it may have blue screened on Friday, but no one has needed a new card or anything since Friday, and then it'll be someday like, right, we need a new card, or the card systems that the thing's got off, we need to go and have a look, and they'll log on to that machine and find it's down. It'd be that kind of little things.
That's true. Actually, I mean, is Windows 10 and Windows 11 IoT hit by this as well?
Question, actually, if it has CrowdStrike, I guess it would do. Yeah. The servers weren't they? And
that'd be interesting, though.
Yeah, and they're often headless systems as well, aren't they? I mean, I know.
At that point, I defer to Gary.
Yeah. I mean, not all. I say a lot of these systems. I know of people who you just get a Dell PC or whatever. You set it up, it controls the thing. You put some kind of remote control tool on it so that you can access it. You take the monitor and keyboard and mouse away, and you just leave it. Distribution points is another one. Pixie Boot distribution points, things like that, where they just chug away. You never touch them. The automatic updates and everything, and then you think, oh, why is it not working? So there'll be people dragging monitors out of cupboards and plugging into these things that have not been switched on for a while. Or these things that get left alone. No user sits at the machine. It's all stuff like that, really, and especially if they're, if you're doing if they might be in a cupboard somewhere, I don't know, in like a cinema, might have one in the projector room, and it might be above, in a cavity somewhere, and you've got to go and get that. It'll all be little things like that. Will be really frustrating. Perhaps a good reason to have an embedded Linux system in for these kind of jobs. Although, like we said earlier, you said earlier. Dave, for the grace of God, something equally could go with another system. So you just have to keep fingers crossed. But I think it does show that interconnectivity that we've got now, where we're dependent on all systems being running all the time, and one vendor can have a small, or 365 can have an issue, but things kind of chug along. Or if Amazon has an issue, things chug along. I mean, remember when Facebook went down couple of years ago now, wasn't it? That did have some knock-on repercussions, but this is probably the biggest one we've seen. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think it kind of shows up the fragility of the digital tool chain. Really, we never know when that next component's going to come from that we think is fine, just sticking away. Then background and it goes boom, and then everything comes, everything falls down around it. I mean, we've seen it before with malware. We've seen it before with with ransomware being embedded in things that we didn't realize, and now we're seeing it with something which should never have happened, and yet it did happen. And so I do wonder what the next little bit in the tool chain is going to be that we don't know about yet. That's sitting there and it's going to go wrong one day and bring the whole house of cards down again. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of IT people looking very hard now at their estate, thinking, what is here? What don't we know about? What do we need to audit, perhaps in more detail? So anyway, it's been a fun few days.
It has been a fun few days. I've got you on the show because I wanted to ask you about how you're getting on with your EVs. You've got two now, have you?
I've got two now, yeah. Famously, it thinks it's done 114 million miles for some reason.
Has the battery degraded in those 14 million miles?
Battery's not, the battery's fine. It's,
so where have you been commuting to the sun?
According to Kia, I've done 114 miles in about 114 million miles in 18 months. Good news is the battery's fine. Same set of tyres too. I mean, EVs are amazing. Actually, same set of tyres, brakes the same. I mean, all I do is change the washer fluid. Fantastic. So I mean, EVs are incredible. So I did ask Kia why it's saying this ridiculous number on my Kia Connect app, and they said, we're not going to talk about that anymore. So I'm wondering what's going on there. But I mean, I like my EV so much. My Kia one, we got a Renault Zoe, basically as a runaround, and again, I had to say, utterly brilliant. Really can't fault it at all. Although I would say, again, I think, as I said the last time I was on the show, I'm able to plug things into the house, and that makes a big difference because I don't really feel the cost of charging at all, and it's just really convenient. And I mean, the Renault Zoe will do 240 miles on a charge if you don't drive like a lunatic, and the Kia does 280 miles on a charge, and that really is enough to get wherever I need to go, charge up there if it's a long way away, and come back again. They're both great, and
the Zoe's come a long way since the one I borrowed, which did 68 miles.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I bought the Zoe, I did look at some very old ones with a smaller battery, and goodness me, they weren't good. I thought I'm not sure I'd make it out of town in this car. Whereas I think they'd pretty much fixed the tech by the time. I mean, the one I've got is a 2021 version, I think.
I mean, to be fair, that 68 mile Zoe was brilliant anyway. I borrowed it for a couple of days and loved driving it. It was a fantastic car to drive, really. And the range didn't actually bother me that much because it was enough to get to another charger. It was just
yeah.
It bothered other people in the family more than it did me.
I mean, in my case, both cars were purchased with a view to getting to West London and back. That's what they had to do. That's kind of that was kind of the use case. That's the worst case drive. So it's like about 150 miles range, plus a bit of buffer for faffing around, and they're both fine. But yeah, I mean, I will be honest. The Renault Zoe has been a revelation because it was relatively inexpensive. It was really no more money than a similar internal combustion engine car, which I did find quite surprising. And it's works really well. The only slight problem it's got is I think I might have run over a nail and got a slow puncture on the wheel. That's it. But that's it. Oh, and the other thing is its regenerative braking is nowhere near as aggressive as a Kia's. So as a Kia will go quite happily on one pedal mode. The Zoe, you have to drive it a bit more like a normal car, being quite still. Think, that's using the disc pads on a bit on the disc.
Do you find switching between, because this is something I've been asked a few times where if you switch between cars which you've got different types of regenerative braking, can you adapt quickly to it?
Yeah. I mean, but because you start off driving around town, so it's fine. And also, my wife really does not like regen braking at all, and she actually turns it off completely. So I have to turn it on again. So it's I'm usually quite prepared. But no, in all honesty, actually yes, I will say yes. When I go from the Kia or the Zoe to my very old Golf, which is obviously an older Tory, that's actually quite a shock to go from those cars with their regen braking to the engine braking of the Golf. That's noticeably nowhere near as good or nowhere near as marked. I have to use the brakes much more in that car. So yeah, but you get used to it. I've not really had much of an issue really. But between the Zoe, the only real difference between the Zoe and the Kia, I think, is perhaps the Kia makes more irritating noises when you drive along in terms of the bleeps and stuff. So, you're going too fast. No, I'm not. You misread the speed limit again.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the show before, the EU mandate on intention speed adaptive, and which is actually not enforced in the UK, but because all the manufacturers sell to the EU, and they're going to
exactly.
They're not going to do it any differently. It's on by default, and it relies on that speed camera mechanism, and speed limit mechanism, which they all use the same technology for, and it's really poor. It's
terrible. It's really bad. I mean, so, I was looking at the but also caught the show as well, and it's. It said, it will use your GPS location. It will know maps and the speed limits in areas. It's like, well, it's wrong. And on the Kia, yes, it does misread the signs all the time. It gets really confused on motorways when you have variable speed limits on motorways. It gets completely confused there. Roadworks can go confused as well. But again, you can override it and you can turn it off. The real problem I have with it is when I use the adaptive cruise control that's supposed to look at the road signs and work at how fast you're allowed to go. Yeah. More than once I found that going either way too fast too suddenly or going way too slow too suddenly in a way that I would say is actually quite dangerous.
Yeah, and this is not an EV thing. This is generally across the whole range of anything, any modern car which has got this technology. So one of the things I've spotted quite a lot recently is certain vans which have got the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit restriction on the back and have the sign for that trigger the speed camera thing. So I was following one along on the motorway, it's 70, and it said this van pulled in front of me, doing way more than 70, and more doing 50, and the 50 limit on the side, the back of it was recognised by my camera, slamming on the brakes to bring it down to 50, which is not good. So I mean, those things are a problem, and I think the thing we've also mentioned on the show before is how that's been this ruling's been interpreted, because, as you say, your car beeps a lot. Kias do beep an awful lot, as do a lot of Chinese cars, and particularly, I mean, South Korea, yes, they do beep because that's actually their law, and they beep for everything. They're supposed to notify you. They're actually thinking about moving away from that because for the same reason that EU actually didn't mandate beeps, in that beeps become annoying and get ignored. And if you sound noise sensitive, well, people in my family are, but that's even more of a problem. And the rule, actually, the EU mandate says it can actually be a visual indication. It doesn't have to be a beep, and it can be force feedback on the pedal, which is actually what I would prefer to see being used, because you can just override it if you need to. So I think there's this, and it's supposed to be only a warning as well at the moment. I mean, obviously, the intelligent cruise control is an area where if you're using the speed sensitive cruise control, that's more of an issue. But in terms of the actual what's mandated, it's not mandated to be an automatic restriction at the moment. And as I say, it's not actually mandated at all in the UK, but everybody's still doing it.
Obviously, cars built for the EU are going to arrive in the UK as well, so it's all the same thing.
And there's a big discussion going on some of the forums at the moment about whether you could actually legally turn it off in the engine management systems. So obviously, there's these OBD devices you can plug in and actually change codes on the devices, and there's quite a lot of them around. And some of that, if you do some of those things, it's actually illegal because not illegal, but it voids your insurance because the insurance on it. And in the case of this is because it's not actually mandated in the UK. Could you turn it off? And would the insurers see it as a material change to the vehicle, or could you turn it off and then tell the insurers? But then are they going to not put you at that high risk because you're turning off safety features?
I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to do that unless I was very confident in my insurer. In fact, maybe unless I was the insurer. But what I really like, what I like most is as you say, I find the beeps and the broops and the whoops and things very irritating. Haptic, it's a bit like when I drift out of lane or the car gets confused as where I'm in lanes. It'll beep, but it would also give the steering wheel a little shake too. And I would rather just have the shake of the wheel and just stop the beeping.
Yes, I would as well. I think eventually I'll probably move to that, because at the moment it's going to cause accidents rather than save them because of the distraction level. And I think that's going to gradually get noticed. I mean, there's been a few comments about it in the EU already, but the people aren't listening. And there is a review of it at the end of this year in the EU as to how it's been adopted and how the manufacturers have actually implemented it. And I think there may be some changes to the guidance and the regulation following that to make it more clearer that you shouldn't be using audible warnings.
I mean, have you encountered the issue? And again, this is not an EV issue. We're drifting away from EVs here. Things like the auto brake just stuck, kicking. It's like more than once I've the car for no reason. Think, oh, there's a thing in front of me. I must stop now. And it's like
occasionally,
they all of the vision based systems use basically the same chipsets and the same systems, and they all do the same things. And they're set up. And one of the worst things is they are set up to pass the Euro NCAP and the equivalents worldwide. Yeah. So I mean, there's this classic thing that certain cars will stop for a pedestrian walking across the road in front of you, but that pedestrian's stationary, they'll hit them because that's the car. The system is set up to do pass the NCAP, which is a pedestrian walking across the road.
Well, I think it's important to just emphasise that this isn't an EV issue; it's an all cars issue.
That affects mine.
Yeah, all modern cars.
Yeah.
But Gary, you'll be very pleased now. I'm very happy with the EVs. I'm very happy with the Renault Zoe. It's been so far brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm now a true convert after being very, very snippy a few years ago.
And it's interesting because we often hear headlines in the press about people saying, "Oh, loads of EV drivers want to go back to petrol." I've very rarely met any EV driver who wants to go back to petrol.
I mean, I wouldn't go back for two reasons. One, it's just so cheap. I keep a spreadsheet about how much fuel I used to use. It's like it's so much cheaper to drive an EV. But I can plug in the house. And two, it's like having go-karts. They're so fast. I mean, this is, both cars are not powerful cars, but they're not high-end cars, but they're, I would say, the fastest cars I've ever had, and they're great fun.
You can get a family hatchback which has got the same power, same speed off the line as a supercar. In fact, a hypercar had 5 or 6 years ago.
I mean, they're insanely quick off the line. I would say the Kia runs at a puff around 90 or so, but let's face it, shouldn't be going that fast on UK roads anyway.
No. And most of what people want to be able to do is it's the traffic light Grand Prix, but in a positive way that sometimes you just need to blip out to get out of trouble, and it's not. It's that instant torque which most people actually really want. And they're great fun to drive.
It's basically putting out on runabouts or merging on motorways. I found that transformative now because you put your foot down and it just goes. So you can merge very easily.
Unless you're trying to merge with another EV, then and that's where it's going to get up.
So thumbs up for me. And as I say, 114 million miles still going strong. Just amazing.
That's certainly good.
There are some issues with the Kia Connect stuff. And it has to be said that it has its problem with all the software that the manufacturers provide. Has their problems. You should try some of the VW software before they've done some of the updates.
I did test drive some of the VW cars and they were not good. So I can't imagine what the app must be like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I test. So this is definitely improved, and I should say that if you get a this year VW car with the new software and the new things, it's vastly improved. Complete difference. But last year when I was testing the ID Buzz, I had this amazing situation where it was telling me I hadn't fastened my seatbelt because the door was open. I shut the door and it said, "Oh, your seatbelt's fastened now," even though the seatbelt was fastened.
That's not a bug.
Yeah, and there were lots of things like that, little glitches like that, all around, and the voice control would just jump in at any second. It was so sensitive with that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it has its problems, but equally it works. And the app has some limitations as well, and especially since you have to pay for certain bits of it as well, if you haven't got the right sort of initial purchase price and things. And so all round software is something which which is why I think VW have heavily invested in Rivian recently, because Rivian have got really good software and good people to do that, and I suspect we'll see a lot of that kind of stuff. And it's going to be the next battleground for cars, because if you actually, and this is something that I think Tesla got right very early on, they knew that once you get EVs, the actual driving experience is much of a muchness between EVs. Okay, we talked about regen can be different, and the way you set that up could be different, but actually they're all fun cars. They accelerate quickly. There's nothing distinguishing on engine power, distinguishing on handling is less of something you could do. So you have to distinguish on the driving experience, and a lot of that is going to come down to the software. So having really good software is actually going to be a really critical thing going forward. And we're so used to having good software now. Yeah. We have it in our hands every day when we use it all the time, and having poor software, which is what we used to have in cars, even firmware type software, when we had physical buttons, there's still lots of glitches on. Just remember British Lane in cars of the 80s and 90s.
That was terrible, yeah.
You turn the wipers on and the horn would go.
I've got one easy question for you. As you know, I do have a very old Mark 1 Golf Cabrio. What's a good sort of cheap EV Cabrio at the moment?
Cabrios are interesting. So there's not actually many of them out there, and this is actually something going on. I mean, you can get the smart cabriolet; they're still available. That's actually quite a nice thing in the short range, but great fun to drive, and way better to drive than the petrol version of the smart, because of the gearbox, not having the gearbox, which was always the fun bit of the smart. So it is like driving a go-kart. So it's that sort of feeling to it. I think there's at least one big BMW cabaret out there. But actually, otherwise, I mean, the ultimate one, of course, is the MG Cyberstar, but that's not cheap. That's 50k at the moment. So, but that's a nice car. But I think we will find that there's a lot more stuff coming up. I mean, basically every niche market is starting to be filled this year. So I'm in an alternative space. I'm looking for a 6-7 seater at the moment, and there are no decent 6-7 seaters this year. But next year, there's going to be a load of decent 6-7 seaters coming out. I mean, I did have to say that. I mean, on the face of it, the new Peugeot 5008 looks like a really good 7-seater. You look at it and you think it's got really long range, 400-mile range, and it's got a lot of stuff. And then you realise that the back seats don't have ISOFIX, and only the middle seats have ISOFIX. So to put an ISOFIX is the kiddie car mounting things. So to get to the back seats, if you've got kiddie seats, kids in the 2 ISOFIX points, you have to take the car seats out to get to the back seats because you can't bend. Really strange design decisions I keep finding at the moment on some of this stuff. But there are some decent EVs coming out next year with that side, and I think, and that's one niche which is being filled. The cabaret one, sports car type thing, is definitely the next niche which is going to be filled. There's a lot of people out there looking at that at the moment. And I just talked about smart. One of the things that has been mentioned is the director of engineering of Smart is really keen to bring back the Smart Roadster, but in an EV format and a bigger, slightly have to be bigger and safer car. So I think that's good. Likelihood. So I think come a couple of years' time you'll be able to find one pretty cheap on the market, because we know EV prices are still going to go, because with the mandate that the manufacturers have got to do to meet this year, and otherwise and most of them are failing to meet that mandate in their sales this year. There's going to be a lot of really good discounts at the end of this year. Come December time, it's going to be really good discounts. But yeah, it's an interesting world.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's all about software.
Yes,
all about software.
As we discovered, just be glad we don't have Crowdstrike in your EV.
Well, yeah, some software was taken offline because of it. So
yeah. Just a couple of bits things I wanted to briefly mention before we finish this week. I've been doing some beta testing of software, but not from the Microsoft side. I was actually beta testing this. This is the Korg ARP 2600. So that's a 1971 synthesizer made into the early 80s, actually. Semi-modular synthesizer, and Korg have recreated it using component modeling technology. So it's not just doesn't look like it; it actually acts like it as well. And this is the keyboard. I don't know whether the sound comes through my Teams. I don't think it probably will. But I've been testing it for a few months now, and I say it's just been released, and it's absolutely brilliant. By semi-modular, what it means is that you've got wires that come over, and it's normalized. So this is an oscillator, so that's what makes the sound, and this is the mixer where it goes into the next bit, and it's normalized. So this oscillator one has got a square wave, so the oscillator there goes to there. But you say, I don't want a square wave. A square wave sounds more like a flute or a clarinet type sound. I want a sawtooth, like a brass sound. You can pull a patch cable in and put that patch cable in there, and you can say, okay, I want that triangle to go over there. And then you can say, when I press the keyboard harder, I want it to mess with the filter control. And so you can make your sounds like that. And then you can then save all of these things. And then it's got an emulated spring reverb, the old springs that you have in your amplifiers, and a spring reverb and a tape delay. And it produced some really nice sounds. So I've really enjoyed testing this. Korg have done a pretty good job with this. It's part of the Korg collection, which is a bundle, so they bundled it with some other ones. There's an organ and a piano and other classic synths, but this is the new one. And I have got a complete set of sounds because I had early access. I've managed to create a whole sound bank on there. So these are all the sounds that I've made from it. If you're a Genesis fan, you'll spot a few things in there like Follow You, Follow Me and Abacab and thing. But I've also got sounds from the Yazoo and Blade Runner. So I've done all these things. it outruns a bit more 80s. This is a bit more 70s. So yeah, think more 70s. It was used by loads in the 70s, but I did Vox Humana as well, so which is the Gary Newman sound as well. So there are loads of those. So there's a sound bank that I've got available. So if you do get the app, you can download my sound bank to go in with it. And if you want to just check out the video, I've got a video on our YouTube channel where I explain how it works and the things you can do with it. It's all very analog, which is really good fun. And I said these patch cables, you can do all sorts of things. Yeah, I want the output of the all the system to go back in again to a preamp, and then you can take your preamp out and feed it like somewhere else, and you get some wild sounds out of it. And you've got ring modulators and all sorts. So it's really good fun to play with. So anyway, check out that video, which I've got it on there, and download the sounds as well. So you can have.
I love how they've done those patch cables. You've got the shadow and everything. That's beautiful.
I was going to say,
it
looks so nice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does actually. And one of the things that when I talked to Korg is they spent a lot of time getting the UI elements right. And one of the things that as beta testers are kind of looking at is how it uses the graphics. So it actually uses the GPU to get the nice shading effects on there as well. And yeah, when you cross your cables over, it actually handles it properly.
Yeah, so I was looking at that.
Yeah,
light shadowing into it as well. That's really clever.
Yeah,
it looks great.
Yeah, it's very nice. So you'll really enjoy that if you like the old 70s synth sounds. Yeah, have a look at that. So check that out. Right. Well, I think that's everything from
I've got
a
question for you. Go in. How's the kitchen?
Oh, well, kitchen. Yeah, kitchen is nearly complete. The appliances are in. I've got the Home Connect app installed. I'm just waiting really now for the appliances to be powered up. I think the electrician's back tomorrow, so I shall be getting those in. So these are NEF appliances that use the Home Connect standard, which is multiple German manufacturers all seem to be used. Although I think NEF and Bosch are the same company anyway, aren't they, more or less? So these German manufacturers all seem to share this Home Connect standard. So I've got that installed, waiting to go. So yeah, quite excited now. It's nearly all done. I spent a furious 2 days over the weekend doing all the paintwork before the quartz was fitted today, and the flooring comes next week. So I spent all weekend painting. But it's done.
Did you make a decision on your lighting?
Yes, I returned the hue lights in the end because I just didn't like where they were going to position, and I've already got the spots in that are changeable to warm light or cold. You can change those, and I've got some under counter lights as well, and I've got a pendant light. So I thought another hue light in there is probably just one light too many. So I returned that one. But what I am thinking of doing now is getting a new security camera from a back door, looking at this new door. So I think I might get a look at another blink camera for that one because so I think I might do that. But I've got my new Sonos waiting to go in there as well. So so hopefully by next week I should have tried the ovens and the dishwasher that tells you when it's on your phone when it's done. And I can preheat the ovens, but how we'll get on with that, I'm not sure. Having had the last 3 weeks without any oven has been interesting as well. So I will just be glad to get back to any proper kind of cooking. Well, I won't do it. Right. My wife will be glad to. I'll be enjoy eating her proper cooking. That's for sure. So yeah.
So I mentioned this thing last week as well. Yeah. This is that rope light I was telling you about. So bring it light on and so you see it. So
yeah. That's pretty much like the one I used to have behind me here. Actually, I got it from. It's the one that uses an embedded controller on it. Yeah,
this is similar. Yeah, I mean, this has got Bluetooth control as well if you want it. Interesting is this was a freebie in with another piece of smart home technology.
That's brilliant.
So it's quite good. I mean, it's Bluetooth control. So, but what I'm actually thinking about is I'm wondering if I can replace the controller because it's a fairly straightforward, standard sort of connector on it.
That looks like the exact same one I've got here, and I think I had it's the one I used to have under the keyboard there, and that had a nano. Pi Nano, I think it was. It was one of the controller chips. It uses the embedded C, was it? I was using. No, I can't remember what it was now. But anyway, yeah, I did. You can use one of those standard ones on there.
I mean, this is just literally in the plug is the controller, so I'm sure I can just take that piece off and come up with maybe a Zigbee controller and actually integrate it into the smart home.
I used to use Thornley. Is it Thornley? What was the compiler that I would have used? Thornley, I think it was. But you could use any one. I think there was a few different ones, but nice to program. But yeah, they are fun though. They're quite nice little lights then.
Well, I was thinking about, because one of the things I quite liked about the ID Buzz when I tested over it, it has this thing called the IQ Light, which is basically a strip a bit like that in front of you on the dashboard, and the directions are given to you on it effectively. So if you want to turn left, it shows a green light going to the left. If you want to turn right, and I was thinking maybe I could do a similar thing for people approaching my office. And have a light come across to give me a warning that someone's approaching, without sort of that peripheral view type thing, without something glaring in front of me. So I'm going to get a go. Another smart home project. I haven't had one for a while.
Yeah, they're definitely good. Yeah, it's good fun to have some of those. Well, it was great to get you back, Richard. Really do appreciate you joining us. I knew as soon as the Crowdstrike issue was happening, I thought, I know someone that's going to be all over this.
Yeah, right. So.
Yeah, and where do we find you nowadays?
You can find me writing for the Register, and obviously, if you search for my name on Blue Sky or Mastodon, I'm looking on there. Yeah, that's it really.
Excellent. Well, it has been great to get you back. Gary, what have you got anything on your EV channel?
Still getting together for the EV owner, EV driver show. The latest version of, just pulling a few people together for that. They have some interesting views on different EVs on that, so that'll be good. And getting ready for the 20,000 mile review on my EV6. So just before, actually, because it's almost end of lease on that, so that'll be about the right time to do that. And then
114 million miles, Gary, come on.
I haven't done a 414 million miles, but I think 20,000 is okay, and no battery degradation over 20,000, and it's done reasonably well on that. So and its lifetime average consumption is 3.8 kilowatt hours, miles per kilowatt hour. So I'm quite happy with that.
Mine's 4.2.
Oh, that's pretty good. You're a better driver than I am.
Yeah, well, we've seen you drive the games and the simulators, Gary.
Yeah.
Heavy right foot.
Very heavy right foot, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we'll be back same time next week. We should have a guest joining us next week, but we'll tell you about that next week. You can find me on the usual places, Twitter @AxDixon, mainly on YouTube nowadays, so I do like seeing people over there, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Cheerio.